Good morning. Today is the 29th of Av, the last day before we start Elul. Tomorrow is the 30th of Av, but it's already considered the first day of Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the month of Elul, the end of the year, and it is also the 16th of August. And we are up to the fourth reading of Parashat Shoftim. And this reading wraps up another small section with the Levites. We're not going to discuss that. We're going to discuss the second part of the reading. The reading again is very short, and we're going to be looking at Deuteronomy 18, verse 9 through 13. And I want to read to you the portion before we start. As I have told you, when you come into the land that Avaya your God is giving you, you must not study the abominations of those nations that already live in the land, the Canaanites, in order not to act likewise. However, you should examine their idolatrous rites in order to impress upon yourselves just how depraved these rites are, and in order to teach your children not to imitate these practices. Specifically, there must not be among you anyone who passes his son or daughter through fire. This is the central feature of the cult of Molech. Molech is written exactly the same way as Melech, as king. And clearly this is a comparison that the Torah is doing between the king and the cult of the Molech. And they are related to one another. In fact, modern interpretations, which are not, they don't have to be modern, because you can see this in the ancient world as well, indicate that the Molech was a form of fascism, meaning a form in which you sacrifice your children to the state, to the government. It's actually what we today call fascism. And fascism is, for some reason, associated with reactionary or conservative forces, but most of the fascist countries in the history of the world have been actually the opposite. They've been from the left side of the political spectrum. And so Molech is dedicating sacrificing your child to not the it's the same, almost the same word as Melech, to the state. Or anyone who consults any of the following: a stick diviner, a diviner of auspicious times, an illusionist, a diviner who interprets omens, a divining sorcerer, a snake or scorpion diviner, a diviner who speaks from his armpit by propping up a human corpse under it, a diviner who speaks from his mouth by placing the bone of an animal called a yidoah in it, or a diviner who communicates with the dead. So these are known as the ways of the Amorites. They're actually not named after the Canaanites, but after the Amorites, the nations that lived on the east side of the Jordan River. Even though these methods of divination may be efficacious, meaning they may work, you may find from time to time that you get the right answer. Today we would say even a broken clock shows the right time twice a day. But they may be even more efficacious than that. They may be efficacious scientifically. That somebody would figure out that astrology actually works, a form of divination. And somebody would understand, yes, it works in some sense. You must still refrain from resorting to their use, for whoever does any of these things becomes himself an abomination to God, and because of these abominations, God, or Avaya, is driving out the present occupants of the land of Israel who practice them from before you. Instead, rather than trying to obsessively divine the future, be wholehearted or earnest with God, with Avaya your God. And now he quotes, because I'm reading this from Vishnevsky's translation, he quotes the Rashi on this. This is considered by many to be the most important Rashi in the entire Pentateuch. And the translation is something like this: trust him and accept his providence. You will therefore not fret about the future and thus not feel any need to foretell it. If you behave in this manner, God will keep you in his land. Okay, so he didn't translate the entire Rashi. We'll translate the entire Rashi in a moment. I thought it was going to translate all of it. In contrast to the pagan nations, whom he will drive out on account of the abominations they practice. Let me just read this verse in Hebrew. Tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. you shall be earnest with God, with Havaya, your God. Let me translate the Rashi in full here. The Rashi reads like this: walk with him with earnestness, meaning walk with God with earnestness. Always look for him, for God, and await him. Do not investigate or think about the future. Accept everything that he does with simplicity, or with earnestness. And then you will be with him and a part of his portion in the world. So these are 5 parts to this commentary, this comment that Rashi writes, and they correspond to the 5 words in the verse. The verse in Hebrew has 5 words: Tamim, Tiyeh, Im, Hashem, Elokecha. And so these are the 5 parts that correspond to it. Rav Ginsburg has written a very important description and understanding, a commentary on this, and you can find some of it on our website, on inner.org. I'm going to send you the link in the chat. I really recommend reading this. This is one of the most important, like I said, by many it's considered to be the most important Rashi in the entire Pentateuch. So what is going on here? What is exactly happening? What is this whole? What is the crux of the issue here? To be earnest means to be tamim, means to follow God without not only not trying to find different ways to figure out what the future holds, but actually looking upon these different divination forms as abominations. And why are they an abomination? Why is it so important for the person? Why is it such a central feature of following God to not worry about the future? Not worrying about the future, by the way, can go as far as not wanting to use insurance. It can go that far. There are people who understand that to be earnest with God, you have to also be earnest in all senses, regardless of what happens. You're not interested in divining the future. One might say that insurance is not exactly divining the future, it's trying to protect ourselves from different events. But if you remember again, what it said is accept everything that he does with earnestness. And so, in a certain sense, people might think that even insurance is a problem because it's not accepting it with earnestness, not accepting the negative that might happen with earnestness. Still, this is a level that is not required, it's not a halachic requirement, but I'm just mentioning that there are people who have taken it that far in the pursuit of earnestness, in the pursuit of being sincere with God. Now, I want to go back to the premise. The premise is, even if these ways are efficacious, even if they work, there is a 3-way dispute among the early sages: Maimonides, Nachmanides, and Rashi. Maimonides says these diviners are all charlatans. These things simply do not work. And they fool people into believing that they do. And he writes on many occasions that a wise man would never try to follow this. In that case, of course, insurance would fall out, because insurance is not something that we divine. It's something that we use statistics in order to determine, actuarial computations. So it has nothing to do with divining or with something that doesn't work. So the Maimonides would certainly not include this. Nachmanides says these things work. They do. Many of these diviners actually have something up their sleeve. And it actually does work. They're not just fooling you. Maybe having something up their sleeve here doesn't mean that they're fooling you. It means that they are concealing something that is true up there. And they're pulling it out, and they're showing it to you. And yet he says, and the Torah says, that in spite of the fact that it may be efficacious, you shouldn't follow this. Why? Because you need to be earnest with God. So even if there is a way to look into the future, to divine what the future is, you shouldn't follow it. But by Nachmanides, this is a statement that you are overcoming the reality where it is possible to know the future. Rashi, on the other hand, says something completely different. And this is where the first part of his commentary really comes in. Like you remember, he said, walk with him with sincerity. Always look for him and await him. In other words, there are two options, says Rashi. You can either be searching for yourself in the future, and that is what all divination is about. It is about the attempt of the individual to figure out what will happen with him in his life. Or you can await godliness, or you can await the revelation of God. And they are mutually exclusive. If you are focused on yourself and your future, you will miss the opportunities and the moments in which God is speaking to you. He's revealing himself to you. And he can only do that if you're not interested in the future for your own sake, but rather you're interested in the future for the sake of God. In other words, you're interested in what will be with the world, not because you want to buy another house, but rather because you feel that we have a responsibility as human beings to nurture and develop and bring the world to a good place. So we want to know what's happening, but not in order to improve our situation, but because we owe it to our divine image to bring the godliness out in the world. And says Rashi, these two things are mutually exclusive. You're either going to be looking and awaiting God, or you're going to be looking and awaiting your own betterment, your own benefit. And so this whole concept is that the land of Israel is meant to be used as a place where you can divine, but not for yourself. You should be in a state of awaiting the revelation of what needs to be done. Because at every moment, God reveals what the next step is. You just have to be attuned and listening to it. And you can't do that as long as you're not earnest with God, but rather focusing on yourself. And the statement is that the nations that were taken out of the land of Israel, the Canaanites and the Amorites, they were doing the same thing, but always interested in their own benefit. And that is what you need to switch. And that is what prophecy is about. Prophecy is about divining what God wants, not what I need. Not looking at the world in that sense, but looking at in the world in the sense of what does my higher self say the trajectory should be? How should I be fashioning my life, and so on. And so Rashi really doesn't rule whether these diviners are true, whether their ways are efficacious or not, or whether, like Maimonides says, they're all a matter of they're all fake, they're not true. He just says you have to keep your focus on yourself. We'll just end with one last statement about this. The fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe said that of all the traits of the soul, the most difficult to acquire is earnestness. It's the one that requires the most work, because basically it's what we call being innocent again, or the way that we like to call it, a second innocence. That once you've matured enough, you come to an understanding, yes, the world is a difficult place, it's full of difficult things, and so on and so forth, but I want to remain innocent in the sense of always looking just for the good, just looking for the revelation of God through the reality that I'm living in. Thanks for joining, and God willing, I'll see you tomorrow.